Hello and welcome to the channel. I have an exciting announcement for you all today, and that is that the data mapper has reached public preview. So let's go ahead, let's dive deep into this subject and see what it's all about. All right, so naturally data transformations are a core component of any iPaaS platform. And previously in Azure Logic Apps, we did support data transformations, but you always had to bring your existing data transformations into the product before you could go use them. And so that took place through uploading XSLT that may have been generated from a BizTalk map, or it was a situation where you had created a liquid transformation outside of Logic Apps and then brought it in. So now we are announcing a native modern experience that you can go ahead and use directly inside of Logic Apps itself. Now, this is currently a public preview, so I do want to call that out. No, I don't have a GA date just yet, but it is something where we're actively working hard on and getting to a production state. But in the meantime, we would love to hear your feedback. So let's take a quick tour of the new data mapper experience. So what we do see here is we're in VS Code, naturally. For now, this is just a VS Code experience. And we have this ability to go ahead and use the new data mapper experience that we see here. So some of the features or the capabilities of this particular version, and remember this is public preview, is that we do have support for both XML and JSON. And so what this means is that you can do kind of any-to-any mapping. So you can go XML to JSON, XML to XML, JSON to JSON, JSON to XML, etc. So you really have that support regardless of sort of which end of the pipe you need that particular data format. Today, and we'll see this in the demo, is we do have a test experience, right? You click on this test button here, and it is manual for now, and you'll have the opportunity to provide a sample message and then go ahead and click a button to go ahead and test it and then see the output of that map. Naturally, as you would expect with a visual data mapper, we do have drag and drop experience, right? So you'd have the ability to go ahead and connect, one element over to another element. We do have pre-built functions. You'll see that here, the FX icon, you go ahead and click that. You'll see the library. We'll show that in the demo as well. Here's a few that are on the screen that you can go ahead and see. So we have the functions that you would expect to see. So certainly things around string manipulation. Here is an interesting one called if-else. So this is around conditional logic. And so here we're trying to avoid having to chain too many of these things together. So, if it's this value, great, provide, the true case. If not, then go ahead and provide the false case. So I think if you're coming from BizTalk, that is a function I think you will go ahead and enjoy. We also have a map checker experience. So it's not like enabled just right here in this screenshot, but we've got basically the ability to click on this particular tab, and you will see any sort of errors or warnings related to your map. So if you're familiar with Flow Checker in Power Automate, it's a similar concept. And should you have, say, validation errors, it's quite easy to be able to discover them and then click into them, and we'll take you right to the location in the map that you need to go ahead and address. Another thing which isn't really visible here, but you will see it in the demo, is this property panel for easy configurations. Naturally, we do provide the ability to drag and drop the inputs, from one node to a function or a function to a function. But we also have a drop-down experience that you can go ahead and take advantage in the property panel. So this is just a few of the many features that we do have inside a data mapper, but wanted to just give you a brief introduction on the topic. Now, because it is public preview, there's going to be areas of opportunity. And so I think that's what I want to stress here, right? This is a journey, and this is one step on the journey, right? We're just filling up for gas. We've just made our first stop. And so what are some of the things that are in our backlog? I wanted to at least give you some visibility. Once again, not making any firm commitments here, not making any firm timelines here, but these are some of the things that are on our backlog that we are exploring, I think is the best term. Support for comma-separated files, CSVs, that's really important for us. That's something that you naturally have in BizTalk. We do want to provide a capability in the new mapper experience for CSV files. Automated testing is another area where people have made this ask. And so the ability to be able to go ahead and programmatically call a map and be able to retrieve the output is something we're targeting. I certainly wouldn't say we're going to have a very elaborate, sort of very detailed test suite, but certainly the ability for you to call an API, pass in a payload, get the response, and then you having the ability to go ahead and provide assertions or write assertions against it is kind of some of the things that we're thinking about in that area. Custom extensibility is quite big. Naturally, we're going to try to provide as many out-of-box functions as we can, but reality is there's going to be needs where a developer is going to need to have some custom logic, and so this is something that is on our list. We're still figuring out sort of what we want to do and how we want to do it. So no predictions just yet on what that might look like. Like, is that inline XSLT? Is that some sort of coding? Is that managed code, etc.? TBD, but we do appreciate the need. And so what we're looking to solve the need. The implementation will come later. Debugging is another area where people have asked for additional support. Once again, not making any predictions about how we will support debugging, but I do want to call out that we understand the need and respect sort of the feedback we've got in this area as well. Filtering and sorting, this is something that is shouldn't be too far away, and so you can kind of think of this as, hey, I need to be able to find distinct, say, nodes inside of my payload, my source payload. Maybe I need to sort, say, alphabetically. And so like these are things that are actively being worked on. Things that you would typically have to write custom XSLT to achieve. This is something we're looking to provide native. Now another area is nested folders, which isn't supported just yet. And there's sort of two flavors to this. One is just being able to organize your schemas in different folders so that you've got this ability just to organize your assets how you want. And then sort of part two is where you have import statements. So maybe you have a parent schema that references child schemas. And those child schemas you want to keep in a folder. So that is something that is we are aware of and is on our backlog as well to go ahead and address. Code view. So I didn't show it, but there is a code view. Let's see if I've got it here. We've got a code view here on the VS Code experience where I can go ahead and click on this button and see the underlying YAML for a particular map. So that is something that today is read only. This is something we do want to build upon, give developers the option or the ability to go ahead and make edits. Now, today you can go ahead and open up that YAML file inside of VS Code and see it and edit it naturally. But there's sort of a little bit more to it than just that. We want to make sure that if you are coding something, that if you make a mistake, that we can signal that. And so we don't want you to corrupt your map without good visibility on what you broke. And so we do need to include some guardrails, some safeguards to ensure that you've got feedback around, say, malformed YAML files. And much, much more. So these are just some of the areas that are sort of top of mind for us. Don't necessarily look at this as an order or an order list in terms of what will be delivered. These are just some of the sort of key areas that we've gotten feedback through our private preview that I just wanted to call out. So in case you were wondering, like, hey, have you thought about it? At least you know that it's on our radar. Now, what is crucial here is feedback. So feedback in the form of could be bugs, could be enhancement requests, and you can go ahead and provide that to us at this particular URL. So this is where the data mapper team is looking for feedback. This is where we update items as we're working on them. You can probably see that we've got some items already sort of listed here that have been discussed on previous slides, and that's just sort of proof that we're sort of paying attention to this area. And as we are working on these items, we're updating. And so you can go ahead and be able to track some of your requests as well. So once again, not committing to any sort of timeline around specific items, but this is essentially where our engineers are working out of, and it's a good way for you to provide the feedback, and then for us to be able to then triage it, and then you being able to get visibility into the progress that's being made in that area. So I've chatted enough. Let's go in and see a demo, and we'll start from scratch and take you through the entire journey here. Okay, so I'm going to give you the full tour here, so bear with me. Now, naturally, you need to make sure that you've got Logic Apps working inside of VS Code first. So I do have a video on getting this set up. I'll include that, but you do need to make sure that you can go ahead and build a Logic App workflow and run it locally before you start to introduce the data mapper component. Now, I'm working with some private bits. I'm recording this before the go live, and so naturally there's going to be one step that's a little bit different here. So we've got the Logic App extension, which is used to go ahead and to create Logic Apps. Now we're introducing a new Logic App extension for Data Mapper. And so I've installed this manually through like a private build through this VSIX. But what you're going to want to do in public preview, if you're watching this video, is you should be able to search the marketplace for Azure Logic Apps Data Mapper. And naturally, we're not going to see it here because we've got, I've got a private build. This is before the release, but this is where you would go ahead and find it, and then you would go ahead and install it. So that's how you're going to get the Data Mapper functionality available to you. You will know you've installed it correctly when you see these two buttons here, create new data map and load existing data map. Now, I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, start from scratch. And so we're going to go ahead and create a new project. And we're going to go ahead and click on this button here. And we're going to then select a folder that we can use for this particular example. Okay, so go ahead and get a folder set up and go ahead and select it. Now, for this purpose, we will go ahead and we will just create a stateful workflow, and we will just call this my workflow. Okay, so now we have our workflow project. Make sure you can go ahead and open the designer. This will take a few moments. Okay, for this, we're going to skip for now. And here, if we can see this, we know we're in good shape. So while not directly related to the data mapper, if you can't get to this screen, chances are you've got something going on with your VS Code installation. And as a result, you should probably get that fixed before introducing sort of additional components. Another important prerequisite is in your local settings.json file. So you'll see this in your project, and just be aware there's sort of two versions of these files, right? You've got a design time one that would be part of workflow design time, and then you've also got the one that's in the root folder for your project. This is the one that we want to target. Do go ahead and click on that file. Then make sure that you've got these scenarios, these settings. The two most important ones here: functions worker runtime. This is going to be .NET isolated. And this is just so that we can go ahead and execute the transformation. You might see a 502 error when you try to call your data transformation if you don't have this set. The other very important setting here as well is this Azure Web Jobs feature flags. We need to go ahead and enable multi-language worker. So do ensure that you have these settings set correctly. If you don't, you're going to run into issues with testing the map, and then also being able to call it from a workflow itself. So now what we're going to do is go over to the A, and we're going to create a new data map. And here I'm just going to call this XML to JSON YT. And then we can flip over to our Explorer view. So here we've got to add a source schema and a destination schema. So I've got a couple that I've got set aside here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to copy those into the correct folder. Now, if you've done any sort of data mapping before, you will be aware that we've got a folder structure here for our transformations and our schemas. So inside of the artifacts folder, we can go into schemas, and then what we're going to do is just go ahead and copy our files here. So what I've got is I've got one XSD, I've got one JSON schema. And so we're going to map from XML to JSON. So once we go ahead and drag those into the correct folder, we should see them show up here inside of VS Code, the folder structure here. So let's go ahead, let's add our source schema, which in this case is going to be our XML. And so I'm not seeing it here, so let's just go ahead, let's just close down this map, and then we'll go ahead and let's go ahead and create a new data map. So we've got it cached, so it's probably a good idea to put those schemas in before you try to create the data map. So I'm just going to try this again, XML to JSON. Now if I go ahead and select my source schema, we'll see them there. So probably better just to get the schemas into the folder first and then create the map itself. So here we're going to go with XSD on the source. We're going to then go ahead and select JSON as our destination. So here we're going to be represented our sort of overview page. Now don't try to map anything across. The way this works is you always want to start with your destination and then be able to go ahead and map back to the source. So what we need to do is here we can zoom in. Here I'm just going to go ahead and use my mouse wheel, and I can zoom in as I need to, and I can then go ahead and click into this specific element. Now what we can see here is we've got a bit of a hierarchy, right? So we've got our this parent node, and then just a child element, and then we've got some records here that we can further explore, further drill into. Now, so what we've tried to do with the data mapper is we've tried to create an experience that allows you to kind of zoom in and zoom out. And so that's kind of what we're doing here. We're starting to zoom in, and then up top here you'll see some breadcrumbs. These are basically our navigation control, so we can basically go back up the stack if we wish. Now what I need to do here is, the first thing I need to do is go ahead and provide a hard-coded value for this particular operation type. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on it. When I click on it, we're going to introduce this properties pane. And when we start to do mapping, this will be interesting as well. But in this case, what I'm going to do is just provide a hard-coded value. And here the value I want to include is 20. And we're just going to go ahead and hit enter. And so that's kind of the simplest way of going ahead and assigning a static value to a particular element. Now, next up, what we want to do is we want to map in this particular record. So let's go ahead and click into it. Then we're going to see these two values appear. Now, what I need to do is to select the appropriate elements from my source schema. So I can go ahead and click on select element, and then I'm going to see this source schema pop up, and we've got like our long list of elements that we can go ahead and map. Now, once again, the goal of this data mapper is to avoid a lot of clutter. So we can go ahead and add all of these if we want, but then we end up with a very long list of sort of elements that we need to sort of manage. And so the goal here was we wanted to avoid that and allow you to just select the ones that you wanted to include, right? So there's no point adding all of these if it's just going to add a bunch of clutter. But you've got sort of full control on how you represent that. So that's kind of the point, is you bring different nodes or elements into scope, and then you can choose to go ahead and map them. So we're just going to do some straight across mapping here. We've got this interface ID. We'll go ahead and map that. And then we've got this ID record. So let's go ahead and map that. Now, like any mapping product, you probably should save. Save frequently, save often. When you do, you'll notice in the bottom right-hand corner that we've saved successfully. And you'll also see that we've got an XSLT file that's been generated. Okay, so what does that mean? So if we come back over to our Explorer view here, we've got map definitions. This is our YAML file. And this basically includes like some metadata about our mapping. And as we're working through this map, we're actually updating this YAML file. Now, when we're done and we hit save, we will generate this XSLT file for you. Now, when we get to calling this map in our Logic app in a little bit, that's where this will become more important. Now, okay, what does this YAML file include? So let's go ahead, let's open it. We can see that we've got the different inputs and the input types. So that's kind of like our metadata. We've got our source schema, our destination schema, any sort of namespaces that might exist. And then we can start to see basically like our mapping statements itself here, right? So here we've hard-coded a value, and then here we've got basically some straight across mapping from that perspective. So that's our YAML file. Now, another sort of quick way to look at that is clicking on Show Code. This essentially is the same sort of view, the same data that we saw previously. This is read-only for now, something we're considering enhancing in the future, but this is a good way if you just wanted to go ahead and sort of quickly look at sort of the rules itself, then naturally that's an option for you. So we've got sort of our top level here mapped. Now let's go ahead and sort of move back up the stack. And now we want to get into this order record. So let's go ahead and click into that. And here we've got, all of our various data, attributes here that we want to include. So once again, we need to bring some data into scope. So we can go ahead and look at our source, and then choose like the data elements that we want to be able to bring in to this specific basically mapping segment that we want to go after. And so once again, let's go ahead and do some mapping. Now, we know that mapping isn't, quite that simple. There's definitely things that you need to go ahead and manipulate. So we've got functions. Functions are the way to go ahead and do that manipulation. So if you've worked with BizTalk in the past, you're familiar with functoids. These are sort of very similar conceptually, and these are reusable functions that you can go ahead and use to build out your scenarios. So let's take a quick tour. We've got collection. If you're used to using indexes and accessing specific nodes by their index, you can go ahead and use these two functions. We've got min, max, sum. We've also got conversion, as you would expect, to date, to integer, to number, to string. We've got a series of date time, basically functions that we can go ahead and include. We've got logical comparisons, so these are always important if you need to do things like if this equals some value, then do this, otherwise do that. That's where you'll appreciate this if else. We've got, is nil, is number, is string, logical operators, the things that you would expect to see. Math, so if we need to add numbers, divide, etc., we can go ahead and use the math functions. String, naturally a very popular set of functions that you're going to want to use. So here, let's just go ahead and we'll trim left. In this case, make sure that we've got no spaces previously, and then the output we'll go ahead and assign to plant. Now, one thing to note about functions is there's kind of like two modes for functions. This is considered expanded, and then we've got simple. what you can do is click on this configure button, simple, expanded. If you click on simple, it's just a smaller icon. And then if you want to go ahead and have expanded, you certainly can go ahead and see sort of the larger, more verbose version of that particular function. Now let's go ahead and add another connection here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these two, but now I know I need to do some additional manipulation. I can just click on this plus sign, and then what we're going to do is we're going to use the concat. So we can go ahead and add this concatenation function, and then what we can go ahead and do is configure it. So this is where the properties panel gets kind of interesting, right? So here we're going to select our concatenation function, and then we can see that it's already connected to order ID. Now, if we want to append something to this, we can go ahead and select another value if we want, or we can just enter a custom value. Once again, I'm just going to go ahead and add some strings here in order to make that happen. And so here it's basically a hard-coded value that's going to be included. Now, we see these drop downs. So this is what also is kind of another way of mapping, like for drag and drop. If that works for you, great. If you start to have like longer lists, maybe that's not as practical. You want to then be able to use the drop down here. And then certainly as you chain these functions together, like especially if you're doing logical operations, you can start to connect these things together as well. So that all works. All right, so let's see what else we got to do here. We've got to connect this and connect this, and we will go ahead and connect this as well. So once again, saving's good. Let's go ahead and save. Now we're not quite done just yet. We need to go back up, and we need to map this consumption node here as well. So let's go ahead, let's select our elements here, and let's go into our item. And then once we're in our item, we've got additional values that we need to go ahead and include here. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and map our material. Let's map our move type. Let's go ahead and send these across. So let's try something here. Let's go ahead and do some conditional mapping. So what we're going to do is add an equal, and that's going to be added to the top. Okay, and then we're going to connect this, and we're going to see if this entry unit of measure is equal to K. Now this is going to return a Boolean value, right? So then what we can now do here is go into if, add an if, and then we'll connect this to our condition. And then if that is true, then what we'll do is we will go ahead and enter a custom value of KU. And we can map that across. So this is just kind of for illustrative purposes. I could have also used if else, which would also be quite interesting as well, where if I had the sort of alternative condition pass in a different value from that perspective. And so that becomes pretty important, where these destination nodes right now, they can only be connected to one input, and using that if else allows you to sort of have one input but having conditions from that perspective. Okay, let's just go ahead and we will just map these straight across, and let's go ahead and save. Okay, so now we've done our mapping, and we've got our various functions all wired up. One thing worth showing here is if we kind of go back up the stack, we can go ahead and take a look at this global view, and this will allow us to give sort of that macro view of what fields have been mapped. And certainly we can go ahead and zoom in here just by using like our mouse wheel if we want, and can kind of dive deeper into this and not. So it's something just worth highlighting and showing here. Okay, now what we can do, I think we're ready to test. So we can go ahead and do so. One other thing just to note here, let's go back to the top. You'll see these values here, they're sort of half full. That just means that we've got some mappings in place. If you had like all of your nodes mapped, then you would see a full circle from that perspective. So let's go ahead, let's test. Let's go and select our sort of source message. Make sure we click on input here. We'll just go ahead and remove all of this, and then we'll go paste. And we should be able to now test this. And when we test, sure enough, we'll go ahead and see the output. Okay, so we've tested our map, and now we're ready to go ahead and call it. So what we can do is go back to our workflow and head over to the designer. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to add a request trigger. Then what we're going to do is we're going to click on the plus sign, add an action, then just do a search for data mapper. So this is going to be a different action than what you're used to using. And here we're going to set our content. Now this is a new designer inside of VS Code, so if you haven't used this before and you want to populate dynamic content, go ahead and click on the lightning bolt, and then we're going to go ahead and select body. Now for now, you're only going to be able to load your map from the Logic app itself, so there's no support for integration account, at least not at this time. And then here we've got just a little bit of a bug. Like I said, it is public preview. We don't have the drop down, but what we can do is just provide the name of our XSLT file here. So XML-JSON-YT.xslt. So don't put the YAML file, put the XSLT that was generated. Then let's go ahead and let's add a response. And then we can just go ahead and include the output from our transformation. So we've got our transformed output. Okay, let's go ahead and save. Now we need to get this thing running. So do make sure you have your Azurite running, right? So go to View Command Palette and you can Azurite start. We need to make sure we've got these 3 different services that are running. Then what we can do is click on our workflow and then click on overview. Before you click the overview page, do make sure that you start debugging. So that is an important step. You will notice that when the debugger is running, it'll turn orange here at the bottom status bar. Then you can go ahead and right mouse click on your workflow and then click overview. You'll know you're in a good spot when you see the complete URL here plus the run trigger button here enabled. All right, so I've grabbed my URL from the overview page inside of VS Code. I've pasted that URL here in the URL field. I've set my method to be post. I have a header here because I'm sending in XML, so I've got content type application XML. And then I have a message body here. You can see it is in XML format. And I'm going to go ahead and submit and send this off to my Logic app where we're going to go ahead and run that transformation. And you can see that we've run the transformation. It is in JSON format. So we've successfully converted an XML document to JSON using the new data mapper action. Now let's flip back over to VS Code and we'll just do a refresh here. And we'll go ahead and take a look at our run history, and we can see that we've got a record here. And much like you would expect with any Logic app experience, you've got the sort of follow the breadcrumbs, input and output actions are all captured. And if we head over to our transform XML, we can see that we've got XML as input. We can see the name of the map that we're calling, and then we can see our JSON output. So yeah, it's working. And then here we just go ahead and send our output from our transform using data mapper XSLT action through the response and back to the calling client. So yeah, that's the demo. That is a walkthrough of the new experience, as I mentioned before in the introduction. Do go ahead, give us feedback, try this out, let us know if there's scenarios that aren't covered, and go ahead and log those issues in the GitHub repo. You'll find that link in the video description as well. But that's the way to make this product better. So the more feedback that we have, the earlier we have feedback, the better the outcome, the sooner that we can go ahead and bring that value to you. So thanks again for checking out this video, and we'll see you soon on the channel. Take care.